I think we are behind schedule, well, let us start our technical session one. I think without any break and immediately. To all the participants who are logged in, we have 4 technical session, and believe me, the best mind of water in India, they will be there in the technical session, and you will really enjoy to listen as well as to interact with them. So with that, initiating the technical session one, which is on mapping of water resources in India. This will be chaired by Sri A.V. Pandya. He is a very, very distinguished man of water in India and internationally also. Presently, he is the Secretary General of International Commission for Irrigation and Drainage, an international, very distinguished international body. He is MTech in Structural Engineering from Indian Institute of Technology, IIT New Delhi. Wide experience. He holds many distinguished posts in India, like Chairman Central Water Commission, Director General of National Water Development Agency, NWDA, and Chairman and Managing Director of National Project Construction Corporation, NPCC. So very distinguished career, very knowledgeable person. He will be chairing the session. And there will be 2 keynote address. The first keynote address will be by Mr. Sanjay Marwaha, who is the member headquarter in Central Groundwater Board. Sanjay Marwaha is a product from Punjab University, Chandigarh, and a very long career in Central Groundwater Board, but most importantly, and very distinguished career, written many paper, many report. I am not going into detail of that because of shortage of time. But the very important thing is Mr. Sanjay Marwaha is spearheading the National Aquifer Mapping Program. I would say the largest aquifer mapping program taken up anywhere in the world that is going on. So he is spearheading that under the chairman, Central Groundwater Board. Then our second speaker is Dr. Abhijit Mukherjee. He is a professor in IIT Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur, and dealing with groundwater. He is a PhD from USA and came back to India and joined IIT Kharagpur. He has also won many awards, written many books, written many papers. I am not again going into that detail, but I would say one of the very distinguished achievement of Professor Mukherjee is that for the first time in India, the most distinguished science award, that is Shanti Sarup Bhatnagar Award, that has come for groundwater for the first time. It's the most prestigious scientific award, and Professor Abhijit Mukherjee has got the Shanti Sarup Bhatnagar Award for his work exclusively on water and specifically on groundwater. So I will now hand over to Pandya Saab for chairing the session. There will be a presentation first from Pandya Saab, then there will be following by presentation from Sanjay Marwaha and Professor Abhijit Mukherjee. Over to you, sir. Pandya sir.
We are live now. Over to Mr. Pandya.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir. And the video is also.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Dipankar Saha, for the nice introduction. And also welcome to my other co-speakers, Mr. Sanjay Marwaha and Dr. Abhijit Mukherjee. Today we have the session 1, which is the mapping of water resources in India, and we have a very onerous task ahead because it is very much important to know what is the resource available to you before you start managing the resource. And that is one of the very crucial aspect of the entire water resource management exercise. We have a fairly good idea, but then still at the micro level and at the medium level, the management requires to be improved. So maybe today's session we'll be having a good look at it. So at the outset, let me start with this presentation. Uh, yeah, I think now the presentation will be visible with a little glitch
Yes, sir.
for
We are able
getting
to see
the
the presentation.
whole thing done. Um, Let us start for an idea about the strategy that we require for water resources development. The issue is that it's a very critical resource. Everybody knows it. We will not devote too much time on it. But the fact remains is that we need to really look at the situation in which we have to treat water differently. Because when we look at the resource, the many other resources like minerals, land, energy, they have a static kind of a situation that the resources are generated in a static manner at a specific place, whereas in case of the water, the water is a dynamic resource in the spatially as well as temporally. You have to have the water at different points of time and in different manner, and then the availability also keeps on varying with the space and time. So this is something which is a very important aspect that we need to really understand when we look at the strategy for the developing the water resources. It's essential for the all spheres of life. We have a Because it is essential for all spheres of life. Everybody becomes a stakeholder, and then every stakeholder has to have a view about its management and about its development. So while these views are being held by various people, we have also landed up in a debate of macro versus micro for its harnessing and development. This is a very, very pertinent debate that has been going on since quite some time. And a lot of people try to sort of take up one of the issues and then try to sort of say that this is the panacea. So my feeling is that this is not the way we should be able to look at it, because the dynamic nature requires the address of the issues of sustainability. Because the water is going to be available to you in a spatially and temporarily varied manner, and simultaneously because of this cycle, we will be having these water resources almost on an average at the same point of time at the same place. This issue needs to be really addressed by a renewability cycle thinking, that what is the renewability of a particular source and whether that renewability matches with the replenishment of the cycle. And if any excess use we carry out in a shorter time span than the renewability cycle, then there is going to be a unsustainable use, and that unsustainability is going to manifest in some fashion or other as we move forward. This is what we are witnessing in case of the groundwater, especially, that in many of the places our excess use compared to the renewability cycle of that particular groundwater resource in that particular area has created extreme groundwater shortages. So the issue of renewability is important for better water management. Now let us see what is our availability scenario. Our share of water resources is around 4% in the freshwater resources, and our population is 17% of the world population. So when we look at the water availability per capita, because of the growing population, we realize that we will keep on having lesser and lesser per capita water availability as the population keeps on growing, because the total water that is available on an average basis is more or less fixed. You do not have too much of a variation in that particular availability scenario, but you do have a lot of demand because of the growth in population. Now when we look at the source, the primary source is that of the precipitation. And the precipitation, the large part of the precipitation is basically in the form of a rainfall. And this rainfall, when we look at the availability scenario based on the rainfall, then we realize that we have very few areas where we can say that the rainfall is near average. And then there are large parts of the areas which are actually below average. However, when we take the averages, then it actually hides a lot of disparity, as it is seen in the table given by the side, that we have maximum running at 11,000 millimeters and then minimum running at around 100 millimeters. Now in this kind of disparity, naturally the availability also varies considerably, and this considerable variation in the availability is something that needs to be appreciated when we start advocating various strategies for water management. Second issue is that we then have to look at the macro picture, because in a democracy you have to provide an equitable resource to all the persons concerned in the manner that they need. Because if you do not do that, then the equitability principle of the democracy actually gets into difficulty. So when we look at this way, we realize that we need to have a national perspective about the water management, and that is where the macro thinking has to come in. And with the macro thinking, we have to then look at the micro level thinking. But if you start only looking at the micro level thinking in a particular area, then extrapolating those solutions across the country, then those solutions are not likely to be applicable everywhere. So this is an issue that we need to really think about very, very seriously. This is the other issue, that is the temporal variation of the rainfall. Now whatever water that is going to be available to you, whether it is the 1123 BCM of water, largely that water is going to be available during the June to September period of monsoon, and rest of the periods are not going to have enough amount of water that is going to be available by way of rainfall, because rainfall is the primary source of water. Now this is a situation, then what do you really do? This is the way the water wealth, if you look at it on an annual picture, then this annual picture gives you a different kind of a story, that you have got 1123 BCM of water, and then utilizable water, and then out of it 690 is the surface water, and the 433 is the groundwater, and then you have the current utilization is 243 BCM, and the current utilization of the surface water is 450 BCM. So you are running somewhere nearly like 60% between the two on an average, and you have got still 40% utilizable water to really use. So looks very, very nice, but then when you look at it from this temporal angle, then you realize that that is not the case, because that water is going to be available in 3 months time, whereas you are going to need it for 365 days. This is the situation across major basins of India. This is the available average annual water resources potential. Now, when we look at the areas like, say, Brahmaputra Basin or Ganga Basin, the water availability is quite comfortable with the area that we have. We have almost like 27,000 cubic meters of water per hectare available in Brahmaputra Basin, or 6,000 cubic meters per hectare water available in Ganga Basin. But then when you go to areas like, say, Sabarmati Basin, you land up at 1757 cubic meters per hectare. And Pennar, you get about 1144 cubic meters per hectare. But then when you look at it, Sabarmati Basin houses some of the most important economic areas of the country. For example, it houses very large urban conglomerations like Ahmedabad. And it also houses a lot of agricultural development as well as a lot of industrial development. And it is an economic powerhouse. Same is the case with Pennar, which is in the parts of the Tamil Nadu and Chennai. And these areas are actually requiring a lot of water. Whereas if you look at Brahmaputra, you do not have any storages, you do not have any conservation structures, and you are actually affected by floods. Same is the case with lower parts of the Ganga. Of course, Ganga Basin as a whole is giving a very rosy picture, but then even within Ganga Basin, because Ganga Basin is about 53% of the entire country, and when we look at it, the south parts of the Ganga Basin are actually to some extent water short. And the north bank of Ganga and north part of the Ganga Basin is actually very water rich. And these two combined together produces an average which is 6,094 cubic meters per hectare. So there is a lot of need for even redistribution of water within Ganga Basin in order to see that both the areas are able to receive adequate amount of water. This is the groundwater scenario. Again, you can see the areas which are short in surface water are the areas which are short in groundwater. You have a finite amount. The water is a physical quantity. It has got a finite amount that is available to you in a year on an average basis. And if you exploit one of the resource in an unsustainable way, then the same situation will come up, which we are witnessing here today. And for that, there has to be a balance at the national level. But then water becoming a state subject, the issue has become very complex. The concepts of local versus global has actually affected us very severely. And that is where these constitutional provisions, which have also come through historical reasons, we do not really need to go in there. But because of that, primarily the supplies have been given to as a responsibility of the states. But then there was a catch there of entry 56, which said that the interstate rivers, because the interstate rivers are special entities, interstate river valleys are the valleys in which you have to cross the political boundaries, you have to cross the administrative boundaries, and then utilize the water in a manner that is sustainable for the particular given basin. And for that, this union is going to be, or union is supposed to have a preeminent role. But then this preeminent role has not been used to the extent possible of generating a global view of the water availability and water supply. So the constitutional provisions are something that we need to really look at. Similar is the case with national water policy, where water has to be managed as a common pool community resource held by the states under public trust doctrine. This is a very important statement. So any state or any administrative entity should not try to garner all the resources at the detriment of the other parts of the country or other parts which are also dependent upon the same resource. And for that, the river basin has to be considered as a basic hydrological unit for planning. And planning, development, and management has to be governed by common integrated perspective, considering local, regional, state, and national context. And they have to have a sound basis. These statements are not really observed when we look at the water management dialogue that happens in our country. This is the point of concern which we discussed earlier, so we'll not dwell on it. But then you look at the situation. Generally, the water use is directly correlatable to the temperatures that are available at various points in the year. And if you look at the highest temperature areas, the water availability is actually around the lowest. So this requires us to have a sound storage policy. You look at the situation where the United States have a per capita storage of 6,000 cubic meters versus India, where the population and the requirement of storage is at a very meager level. We have something like hardly a few hundred cubic meters per capita. Now it is so simple that per capita storage is a measure because we have got such a skewed availability. The storage is an essential component of the water management strategies. How do you store the water? Primarily, the water has to be stored in the surface. The area that is really important to know is that when we look at the recharges, the rate at which the storage can be filled up versus the rate at which the water is going to be available is required to be understood very clearly. When you have rainfall that is occurring at several millimeters in a day or in a few days time versus the recharge rates, and also compare it to the rate at which you are able to fill up a surface water reservoir, then this particular issue becomes very clear that there has to be a considerable amount of storage generation in the country. The storage generation need not be always equated directly with only one specific area of, let us say, large dams, because large dams have become a very good and very nice beating baby for the entire economic, social, and environmental lobbies. The issue is that this part of the water management is the one which has given you the green revolution, and this is the part of the water management which has given the economic and agricultural growth that you have been able to witness in some of the countries like, say, Australia or United States, or for that matter China, and in many other countries. So importance of water storages in the water management is something that is required to be understood, and that is required to be highlighted, which is not the case in the present circumstances. Similar is the concern of the environment. There's a lot of area where a lot of discussions are taking place on the environmental flows in rivers drying up. But then why these rivers dry up? The total average availability of the water in that particular basin is generally fluctuates around an average. And since the utilization in the lean season, in the absence of a storage, goes very high, the post-monsoon flows get affected from both the angles. And now if you look at the situation, if you have a storage at the head, you are able to improve the flows in the rest of the parts of the river to a very good extent. And for that, if you sacrifice several thousand hectares at a particular location, several thousand kilometers of the river can be provided with adequate amount of water flows. So these thinkings are also required when we think about our water management scenario. Same is the case with the interbasin transfer of water. Again, in the interbasin transfer of water, as you can look at the situation, two biggest available basins, Ganga and Brahmaputra, and look at the amount of storages that have been generated in these two basins versus its availability. And compared to that, when you look at the availability in some of the other smaller basins, the storage available are actually relatively high. You look at the Krishna basin, or you look at, for that matter, to say Godavari basin. The Godavari basin storage is comparable to Ganga basin storage, whereas the Godavari yield is somewhere around 111 BCM versus the Ganga yield at 525 BCM. Naturally, you feel that you are very much short of water, and that is where the interbasin water transfers as a part of the national level water management policies really come in. Same is the case with the per capita availability, and this needs to really work in a sustainable manner. The floods management is again another very important issue, because you have got such large water availability in the Brahmaputra basin and in Ganga basins at the lower plains. This large availability basically results in floods, because as you have seen, the precipitation available is in a very short period of time, and that precipitation, if not conserved, will have a tendency to flow down the river, and that, with the increasing population growth and increasing encroachment into the floodplains, results in lot of miseries and lot of problems. And these problems are also required to be tackled. On this side, this overemphasis on groundwater is something that we need to really look at and very seriously consider. When we are having adequate amount of surface water resources, what sense it makes to first push that water under the ground, consume energy for that, and then pull that water out of the ground, again consume energy for that, and then create certain unsustainable solutions. There is, to my mind, there is a lot of oversale of groundwater recharge as a source of water. We have to really seriously think that how we are doing this and in what manner we should be doing this. And do we really use it as a panacea? That has to be used. The recharge is an important measure. And wherever we have done unsustainable developments in groundwater area, the recharges are needed. But then these recharges are needed and are required to be carried out to bring the groundwater level back up. And for that, the unsustainable utilization there will have to be reduced. But then the requirement of water from the agricultural point of view, from the human consumption point of view, from the livestock consumption point of view, and various other points of view is fixed. So you have to augment from the surface waters in order to see that you do not create a unsustainable solution. This is the thinking that requires for our water management areas. So this duality and these dialogues are something that we need to really very seriously think about and carry out a national level water management view, and we need to carry out a national level policy and strategy for water management. And as anybody who is a student of civil engineering will realize, like in surveying, you have to go from whole to part, because if your whole is accurate at a particular level, or whole is accurate at a particular accuracy level, then the parts will be able to match with each other, and when the parts are joined, the whole will also give you the same results. So managing at the whole is something that is very, very important, and we need to really look at it. And then put your micro level management into this macro, and then do it in a manner so that the micro level disparities are tailored into or integrated into the macro level availabilities. And in that sense, we create a sustainable and an equitable water resources regime. This is a rather long presentation, and I would not like to go into a very long details because we are already running a relatively behind our schedules. But suffice it to say that we need to go for a combined approach, which is an integrated approach, in which we combine the macro with micro, and that way we have to carry out an approach which has to be and basis. That means macro and micro. The present dialogue in the water management that is going on is macro or micro. Whenever we will go to any economist, or whenever we will go to any so-called advocacy kind of a persons, they will say that all this macro is useless. You will only need micro. You need to go to गांव का पानी गांव में, खेत का पानी खेत में. But then when you don't have enough water in your field, then खेत का पानी खेत में रखने के बाद भी आपके पास पानी चाहिए, then what will you do about it? How you are going to manage that? From where you are going to bring the water? These questions are not easily answered, and these questions are not really put in the front. And anecdotal evidence of doing it at a place which is actually relatively well endowed in water, or a better endowed in water in the given circumstances, carrying out some measures and then trying to advocate the same measures all through the area is not something that we should be really looking at. The scientific community are something that has to come up and carry out a systematic kind of a dialogue and reset this dialogue so that the strategy that we adopt is something that can yield us with the long-term results. There are a lot of activities that are required to be done. I have tried to bring in all those activities in my presentation, and maybe this presentation I will definitely make it available to the organizers who can then distribute it across the various participants who are interested, and then a good kind of a dialogue can take place. So thank you very much. I have tried to provide you with a thinking and my feelings about the overall water resources management strategies that the country needs to have. And I will now hand over again to Dr. Dipankar Saha for inviting the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Sir, there are some questions we can take at the end.
Yeah, we can take at the end. Yeah.
Okay. Now I invite Sanjay Marwa sir. Please, your presentation, please. We have already briefed about you. Please.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Saha. Distinguished honorable speakers on the dais and attendees who are attending the seminar. Already the tone of the seminar is very well set. There are very big issues the country is facing. Since the topic is basically the looming water crisis in India, and this technical session pertains to primarily the mapping of the water resources. So I'll remain myself confined to the topic assigned, and the efforts of the government or otherwise I like to share with you with the issues whatsoever there are. So I'll share my screen. I hope it's visible.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's visible.
Thank you.
Yes, visible.
Thank you. So this is the figures. I mean, now well clear that the country has the precipitation, country has the water availability, and we are have the quite large amount of utilizable water, whether in surface or the groundwater. Water is water. There is no doubt with the increasing the availability, the decreasing availability is coming primarily due to the increase in the population, with being the water availability being the same. So it's going to be reducing, and obviously this is a fact which is going to come. We never thought of it earlier. We earlier used to say कि पैसे को पानी की तरह ना बहाएं. So this was an antidote which we should now need to change with so many new pibets that like we should conserve water wherever it falls and we should take it further. This picture has been shown earlier also. I mean, now I'll talk about the groundwater resource availability. There are certain red patches in the country. 432 BCM is the total recharge extractable, and the extraction for all uses is around 249. There are certain red areas in the country, and where the water lies and what are the aquifers which control this particular groundwater, why it is red and why it is blue. The quantum of the water withdrawn in the red areas is maybe say hardly 50% of those in the other areas which are not even red. So that means the groundwater conditions in those areas are very varied. The country is strongly controlled by the aquifers which are available. I'll just talk about those also in a later. Dr. Pandey has already spoken about the rainfall conditions. You know, it was very pertinent to point all those things. We have the certain pictures here for you to see. Left is the normal annual rainfall. Right is the bigger diagram of India and the total number of the rainy days. And then there is a evaporation in the center, that how the evaporation losses it ultimately transfers. And you see the red areas then. Can you see a resemblance over there? These areas, which are these areas, look at these areas. Number of the rainy days, look at these areas. Number of the lesser number of the rain, and then the red ones. Obviously the evaporation rates are higher wherever the rainfall is there, because of the countries, the conditions are like that. Any management which we want to plan for the water resources is very important to be undertaken with a given set of conditions. We cannot create the conditions, we cannot change the conditions. The climate change is already there, which is changing so many things. The rainfall patterns are changing, number of rainy days are changing, even the intensity of the rain is also changing. That means that we are getting so many conditions which are beyond our control. Mind you, here, everybody here, I'll request you, we can generate electricity, but we are not able to generate the water. So water is whatsoever it comes to us, we need to look where it is and then manage it as best as possible. I'll just like to tell you why we need, it's a very emphasis on the groundwater. It's actually, it's very difficult to understand. As Secretary Saab in the opening session has already told, that there was a report by Niti Aayog that the 21 cities will go dry, and they didn't go dry by the 2020. There are reasons to understand, because there are aquifers controlling all those things. It is not a simple table of, it's not a simple calculation of water in a bottle, that you drink a bottle of 1 liter, that you drink 200 ml of water and 800 ml remains. And I drink 200 more and then only 600 remains. So in 3 days, the bottle will go away. The water in the bottle will go away. So this is not the simple conditions which is actually occurring there. It's a proper science which we need to understand where the water goes. So I wanted to have a very simple picture for you, that which shows that the water which goes inside, we pump it through this pumped well, and in the topmost aquifers we are generally talking about these things. But there are bottom aquifers also. There are more aquifers and the deeper aquifers also. These are the waters which are the confined, and they got recharged over not only centuries, they got recharged over the millennia. So we need to consider these things very specifically whenever we start working on any management scenario. Obviously, the figures are there. Now, by knowing all these things, the concept of aquifer mapping came into the being. I'm quite honored by my earlier chairman, Shri Sushil Gupta ji, then Dan Saab, then Saha Saab, and now current chairman Shri G.C. Pati ji. Those who are actually taking the concept of aquifer mapping ahead, and it is now coming in a big way. Why we took it? We wanted to have a sustainable yield management goals. We wanted to have a clear-cut emphasis on the recharge programs, and then the groundwater management strategies can be evolved by the policy planners to control the utilization of the resources. The objectives. What were the objectives of when we started? It was initially conceived earlier in 2010 and 12, but it actually started around 5 years ago. We have now, what was the objectives were to delineate the aquifers in the horizontal and the depth wise. Only problem is, since I told you that it is an invisible resource, so the depth considerations are always there. Please always consider wherever it is, it's a volume, and the volume with the depth, and that too is contained in a rock formation. What is the nature of the rock formation across the country like India? Huge variations are there. That's very important to understand. Why it is important? Because all the aquifers, they have the different water bearing properties and then transmission properties. So both these properties, they control the extraction or the availability of the water in the ground. Then it's more important to know the quality, because the quality, either there are certain now issues, ramifications because of the development of the groundwater resource, the certain anthropogenic, the needs, the demand, and obviously there are certain areas in the country, as already been told by so many speakers, that we have certain groundwater quality problems in arsenic, in fluoride, in so many. Then there are certain quantification of the groundwater resources will be undertaken. Then we will be also suggesting the management of the groundwater resources. So these are just a flow diagram, what data we collected, what data we utilized at the Central Groundwater Board, and the maps were prepared and the management plans are being prepared, and suggesting the strategies for the sustainable groundwater management.
So, okay.
Should I stop?
Sure.
I think
हाँ ठीक है वो मैं देख लेता हूँ, और मैंने मेरा प्रेजेंटेशन है ना, उसको पीडीएफ बना के वो मैंने अभी आपको मेल कर दिया. हाँ, वो आप सर्कुलेट कर सकते हैं.
Pandya sir, can you mute yourself? I request you to mute yourself, Pandya sir. Thank you. So these are the major aquifer systems of the country. Number of these aquifer systems are present. You can just, by the way of this diagram also, you can just have a look at the variation across the length and the breadth of the country from north. Just look at these colors and this. I'll just talk about these major aquifer systems and about their properties, So if you see this the blue color, you may say that it's all blue, the alluvial areas. What are the issues is the high variability in the groundwater availability, the aquifer type, the rainfall. Rainfall is highest in the east and lowest in the west. The huge groundwater extraction in the west. The water is not available here. The rainfall is lesser, but there are huge groundwater extractions because of the good soil and the emphasis because of the green revolution, and they are the food bowl of the country. There is a lesser quantity of groundwater use in the eastern part of the country. There are certain geogenic problems like inland salinity in certain parts in the Rajasthan, in Haryana, and southwestern parts of Punjab. There are issues of the coastal salinity especially in Odisha, and there are arsenic in the Bihar, in the northeast, and certain parts of Haryana. And then there is another aquifer system which is crystallines, and the meta sediments are there. These do not contain, mind you, large groundwater reservoirs. So the water exists only in fractures. If you see the earlier slide, the water availability here and the water availability here may be as low as say hardly say 10% of the what we were seeing earlier. The sustainability of the wells is a big issue, and the reason, though these areas, certain areas are they have good rainfall, but the recharge to the aquifers is slow. So that's why since the recharge is slower, so we need small structures on the surface at the micro level, so that the recharge to the aquifers exists, and the sustainability of the aquifers is made. Then there is another groundwater basement granite gneisses. This is in the southern part of the Bihar and Jharkhand, and then in the Bundelkhand areas, then Andhra, Telangana, Karnataka, some parts of Rajasthan. These areas are there, and the groundwater not easily available. Again, in these areas also the sustainability of the aquifer is a big issue, except where the good fractures are present. This area is, I'm showing now the Deccan basalts. These are in the western part of the Maharashtra. Rather, quite around 70 to 80% of Maharashtra is covered by them. Northern part of Karnataka, southern part of Gujarat, and large part of the western part of the Madhya Pradesh, they are occupied by these formations. These are the black. I mean, you have generally very good rainfall in these areas. During the monsoon, you see very good flooding in these places. But these areas are, because of the Deccan basalts, they have on the top soil is a black cotton soil, which swells when the water, when the rainwater comes. And these swell, once they swell, they do not allow very deeper percolation of the water. So what you need is, you need to have some technologies or the interventions so that the water reaches to the deeper aquifers which have already got desaturated. And the massive basalts, they form very poor aquifers than vesicular basalts, and this massive basalt is in the layered form as with respect to the vesicular basalt. So vesicular basalts are to be tapped, and they need to be recharged wherever they have been extracted. So with these, just a general layout of the India's geographical layout of the aquifer system broadly, and what are the issues concerning to these aquifer systems. With these issues, to have some insight, I already told you that we had the National Aquifer Mapping Program was launched to know the mapping of these aquifers. The data was collected through drilling, geophysical studies, and hydrochemical studies. Out of 33 lakh square kilometer, 25 around was to be covered, has been identified, which is mappable, and say large quantity, around 60%, has already been covered. So I'll just give you few working examples on what are the issues of some specific areas and what interventions have been made. I will just explain to you. For few aquifers, say it's Indus Basin and alluvial aquifers, Haryana, you can see all the red, which is overexploited because of the huge groundwater extraction from these areas. The aquifer geometry is here. There are layered aquifers. At good places, the aquifers are having good quantity of groundwater, but as you go deeper, there are aquifers up to 300 meters, but the quantity of water there is getting lesser and lesser. The best quantity of water which you get is generally in the unconfined or the topmost aquifer. The quantity of water which is available in the deeper aquifer, which is under unconfined conditions, then as compared to the unconfined condition, is at a very lower, say around in a magnitude of 100, they are lesser. Then it was generally said that the groundwater draft is versus paddy area. There is a small chart which you can see that how with the help of even the rainfall is fluctuating. But whenever there is lesser rainfall, these areas are getting good water from the groundwater. So groundwater always comes as the cushion whenever there is a shortage of rainfall. And I like to tell you, these areas are certain areas where the green revolution took place, and but unfortunately, and it's very near to Bhakra, but unfortunately the benefits of those were diminished, and the quantity of the water or the utilized groundwater utilized for growing paddy is growing day by day. How the resource has depleted over a period of 20 years. This small diagram can show you the whole of this water levels are declining. The desaturation has occurred in these areas. And these are the exercises which were covered by the Central Groundwater Board with the stage of development, and there was some possible management interventions which were thought that these areas were to be put under the with the help of the pipes, then change of the cropping pattern, adopt artificial recharge, then total, and what will happen. And in case you change from paddy to maize, what will happen? You can see from 289 to 249. But if you change from paddy to pulses, there can be the substantial increase in the stage of groundwater development. The blocks which are overstressed will, obviously the stress on the blocks over a years will definitely be reduced. So this is just to show you what is the current way of the taking the waters to the fields. So open channels and the unlined open channels, they are only 16%. So there is need to manage the water wherever it is available, whether it is being utilized for the agriculture or in the industry, for the industry. We need to utilize the water in a proper way, very efficiently. And I'll talk about the southern part of the country where crystalline aquifers are there. I told you the crystalline aquifers have huge issues. The groundwater is the only source of irrigation in 80% of the area. Water levels are declining in these areas. Huge number of firkas are there which are overexploited. Then there is a couple, this area is, since is a crystalline, so these areas also have the higher concentrations of the fluoride, which is again a geogenic issue which we also need to tackle. There is an issue of the waterlogging in the downstream side of the Krishnagiri Dam project also. So we studied this area, the aquifer characteristics were studied, the thickness of the aquifers was identified, it was broadly classified into, though the number of the aquifers exists more, but for general or the common utilization, they have been from this diagram on the left, have been summarized into this diagram on the right, where the aquifers have been grouped into the broader categories. One is the weathered and the one is the jointed. The characteristics of these have been indicated. The only biggest issue with these is the sustainability. Though the yields are there, but they do not sustain for longer period of pumping. That means once you pump, the water which will come into the well again will come after a longer period of time. So especially during the non-monsoon period, when the water is required for the irrigation, you need to have the staggered type of a pumping from these aquifers so that the water can come and you can irrigate these crops. Just a conceptualization of the aquifer systems is there. The topmost aquifer, the water from where it is coming, all the surface water going into the groundwater and then being utilized down south, getting into the fractured aquifers. A model was also run for these, that where if on the left is if not much change in the groundwater levels with the normal pumping and normal recharge, few locations only they will show decline, but in case the 10% increase is done and the normal recharge occurs up to 2025, then many regions will go dry. That means the desaturation of the topmost aquifer will occur, which we need to take care with the more sustainable efforts like groundwater management is to be undertaken with the help of the surface recharge, and also coupled with the on-farm management techniques need to be applied in these areas. Just an example of the coastal aquifers also, since India has a very large coastline and especially in the eastern part of the country, along with the certain parts of the country, especially in the Kerala coast, these aquifers are having some issues because of the saline water being ingress. I just wanted to show the work done by our officers in the southeastern region, Bhubaneswar, where Cuttack district they have studied. So these are the certain diagrams, and the issues of these are the unavailability or the poor availability groundwater in the borewells, underutilization of the similar, and there are certain waterlogging conditions in these areas. So this is the map of those areas, what showing the vertical dispositions of the aquifers of the Cuttack up to the 300 meters. I'll show you how these are behaving. So these are the granites on the left, which are the primary aquifers on the western part of the area, and in the eastern there are alluvial areas.
Mr. Marwaha, we are having some constraints of time. So if you can speed up.
Right, sir. Right. I'll take care. I'll just take 2 more minutes and I'll then finish it off. Sir. So you can see this Cuttack aquifer and then the deeper, the topmost aquifer appears to be very good. But the study of the CGWP has shown that the bottom aquifers are having saline ingress, and we need to be very careful while pumping of these aquifers. So basaltic aquifers, I've already told, there was some brilliant study which was conducted by the Central Groundwater Board under the supervision of currently policy advisor PNP, Dr. Saha itself. You can see the areas which are having the groundwater declines, the aquifers, the recharge potential is there. Wherever there is a decline of aquifers, there is a recharge potential. The only thing is we need to find out the water where it lies and then we recharge it. So the study was conducted to by just, you see there's the water which is coming from the hills, and then the bajadas are there. This is a desaturated aquifer. We need to recharge this aquifer. And why this aquifer has got desaturated is because of the overemphasis on the cash crops like banana. So I mean, just to show that once we do the demand side interventions, we can surely save a lot of this thing. I already, if it is permitted to me, can I answer 2 questions right now?
Well, I think Dr. Saha said that we'll take up all the questions at the end. So maybe we'll wait.
Right, you have. Yeah, at the end we will take, no?
Surely, surely. I'll respond. Okay. Already the questions were there in the the chat box and all the questions.
Yes.
Right.
Sir, Professor Mukherjee can take up, sir.
Sure.
Professor Mukherjee.
Yeah. Can you see me?
Yeah, we can see.
Is my camera visible? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Very good morning to all of you. It's my real pleasure to be here at this workshop organized by PNP and arranged by Dr. Saha, who has been a long-term collaborator with me in various studies, since my return to India. So I would be talking about the groundwater quality issues during this talk, and I know that the session is going a little delayed, so I'll try to wrap it up sooner I can. Okay. So with that very brief introduction, let me just share my slide. Okay. Is it visible?
Not yet, sir. You can click share and then.
Right. Okay. Share.
Probably you can open your file first and then.
Right. Is it coming now?
Yeah. Now it is coming.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So you can see the title slide, right?
Yeah.
All right. Good. Okay. Thank you so much again. So I'll be talking about towards safe and sustainable groundwater availability in India, and I'll briefly touch on certain parameters that would be influencing the groundwater safety in terms of quality and where they are available. So before I go into the talk, rather than individually acknowledging my collaborators, I would just try to list this slide where I've tried to summarize my long-term collaborators whom I've been working for almost last 2 decades and who have variedly influenced me, helped me out in several of these slides that I'll show you, several of the projects that I'll show you. So I'll touch on the groundwater issues of India from which it all originates. And I know people have already talked about it. Dr. Pandya has given a wonderful introduction to the topic about the micro and the macro connection. But in a very broad sense, we do have water scarcity. And, I know Pati Saab and the secretary did talk about this. And I know India is going through a water scarcity. But at the same time, when we have water scarcity, we do have water excess in various parts of the country. So where we are going to have water scarcity, let's say in the western part of the country, let's say Vidarbha, we are having a flood in Bihar, which tells us that there is a disconnect which is more related to a management of the resource than the resource itself. But either excess or scarcity, it eventually, boils down to drinking water security. And like as things are moving forward, and you would be watching every year in the media, excluding this year, which has been very abnormal. People across the country are slowly getting into issues of drinking water scarcity. And then come the issue of water quality. Just having sufficient drinking water is not sufficient. You also need to have water with sufficient quality or suitable quality. And these photographs that I'm showing you of, that a disease infested person, these are not photographs that I've taken from the net. These are photographs that I've shot myself over the years that I have studied, groundwater pollution across India, in Eastern India as well as other parts of India. And then we do have the climate change, which is the white elephant in the room, which we don't understand. None of us do. And if somebody says that we do understand, I would not believe, because climate change is still something that we're learning. But one thing we do have understood, that if climate change is being happening or has been something that we are going to happen, it will going to worsen the situation. It's not going to benefit us. It is not going to benefit the hydrologic cycle or the pollution in any way. So we are possibly, going toward a more difficult situation, if I may say, and we need to learn and adapt at this moment, as the chairman said. So groundwater stress in India, and I know it's a repetitive slide, and over the last few lectures, several people have talked about the water scarcity in India, and this slide from Water Research Institute talks about like 54% of India is under stress, and as Marwas have said, it's possibly much more now. And I know like 85% of the groundwater that is available is used for irrigation, mostly groundwater, but water in total. It's used in irrigation. So of course it's a management issue, it's a technological issue, and I suppose we are all learning toward it. However, there is also another angle to it, the angle of the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, many of you would be knowing that the United Nations had collectively for across the world have cobbled up these 17 goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which are to be achieved by 2030. And the goal number 6, SDG 6, talks about access of clean water and sanitation for all. So it is just not a water scarcity that we are looking at from a resource angle, but it is from also an angle of sustainable development and sustainable and secure survival of us as a human race in this world, and specifically India. So when we are trying to understand this topic, we do need to look it also from the angle of sustainable development. And when we talk about sustainable development, it's the quality that matters a lot. Of course, the availability, but also the quality. So when we see in the media, in a lot of ways, that India's groundwater is disappearing in an alarming rate, and we are going to have a subsurface drought, the question that comes to my mind, and what I've been doing a research on for the last about 20 years, is how much groundwater is available in India or the Indian subcontinent, and what is the future? But more so, at least for this presentation and overall, is how much safe groundwater is available. So it's just not the groundwater which is available, but how much of that it is safe. And as this slide from the Water Research Institute shows, that estimates are that about 100 million people or 10 crore people, about 10 crore people in this country is actually suffering from drinking water pollution, and actually suffering from various health ailments that are happening because of polluted water. Now, when we try to learn the polluted water, it is also important to understand the background of it. I'm a geologist by training, so of course I'll go in the more geological side of it. So many of these pollution, which are mostly in the regional scale, they do occur because of the geology. Now, I do get question all the time, like, where is arsenic coming from? Where is the fluoride coming from? My students as well as other audience, I prefer to tell that they are not falling from the sky; they're coming from the rocks. So it's very important to understand the aquifers, the geologic units which will host the water, and how the groundwater pollution in regional scale or the geogenic groundwater pollution would be related to it. So these two figures that I've plotted out are from one of my previous publication in 2015, where the Dr. Shah was the second author, where we tried to define the groundwater systems of the Indian subcontinent and show the distribution of the groundwater pollution from geogenic sources on the map in the right. What is interesting is that almost like 70% of India's groundwater is kind of locked up in these bright blue areas named as the Indus, the Ganges, and the Brahmaputra basin. Now, these area which geologically we talk about, Himalayan foreland basins, it is one of the most enriched aquifer system in the world, but it is one of the most polluted aquifer system in the world. So as you could see from the figure in the right, that much of the arsenic pollution in the groundwater as well as some of the fluoride pollution, they are actually kind of concentrated in this Indus, Ganges, Brahmaputra basin and its adjoining areas. So just having the water in sufficient quantity is not enough, which the Indus, Ganges and the Brahmaputra basin has, but it is also the quality of the water. So then it comes the hydrodynamics and the contaminant fate, which is too much into the details of the science. I'm not going to, but what I'll do emphasize very briefly is what happens. So when the groundwater is recharged from meteoric water, it will go through the subsurface and it will react with the rocks, the aquifer matrix. And there is this whole process kind of delineated in the subsurface that is mentioned in the slide. Again, I'm kind of skipping it. But what happens is, because of these aquifer matrix groundwater interactions, you have the liberation of the geogenic pollutants. And then these pollutants would be discharged either into the ocean or it will be taken up by human being. And then you have the climate change, the human practices and policy interventions. And these policy intervention and human practices, climate change is not in our control really, but human practices and policy interventions are, they would influence the pollution in a various angle. So over the years, we have studied, the groundwater arsenic pollution, and we published this paper in Nature Geoscience about in 2016, where we showed that possibly much of the arsenic in the groundwater is actually being contributed because of the pumping, but the pumping that we have been doing for the last about 50 years now. So what do we do, and what I'm going to present today? So my group, my students, like what I was trained and what I've been trying to transmit to my students, have been to work in the field, to work in the rivers, to work in the groundwater systems, and understand the groundwater pollution, the river pollution by field study examples. So we have been working across the country in various levels, going in the micro level, putting in sensors, collecting samples, and analyzing in our state-of-art laboratory at the IIT Kharagpur. And we have published more than 100 papers out of it. And we have also installed sensors in the river Ganges. So this top right slide, I don't know if you can see my cursor. If you can see, like, there is this cloud-based sensor system that is installed in the Ganga River or the Ganges River in Varanasi, where it will real-time monitor the quality of the river and would tell you whether it's suitable or unsuitable for human usage. But along with that, very micro-level studies that I'm just showed, we are also in very recent times, and mostly in the last 2 years, collaborating a lot with the human and social science people, my colleagues at the human and social science, like economists and social scientists, as well as the computer scientists, the data analytics guys. the big data and machine learning people. And what we are doing is we are broadly using artificial intelligence, both machine learning and deep learning, to understand the influence of geology, the influence of land use, surface water, climate on groundwater in terms of both quality and quantity, and trying to predict the groundwater resource in the future. And for this presentation, the groundwater quality resource for the future. So in the next few slides, I'll try to give a snapshot of it. So this is from a paper that we just published. I mean, it's still in proof stage, but it is available online. Dr. Saha is a co-author to this. So where we kind of integrated, we accessed the 2.7 million locations measurements that the Jal Jeevan Mission hosts, which is about 27 lakhs data points that the Jal Jeevan Mission hosts. And we have used the state-of-art big data analytics and artificial intelligence techniques to map out the arsenic hazard across the country. And you can imagine, like, it's 27 lakh data points. It's a huge repository. The data was was there, and we did a good use of it. And through this, we were able to find out the areas which are lying in the arsenic hazard areas. I mean, people drinking hazardous groundwater in these areas. So the map in the right hand side shows that greater than 90 million people just from the arsenic are under threat. Actually, the artificial intelligence model tells you it's more than 200 million, but a conservative estimate is at least 90 million. And at least 90 million people across India, mostly in the Indus Ganges Brahmaputra basin, are actually drinking arsenic laden water. We also, from our ongoing studies, we have also did numerical simulations and modeling, and we showed that some of this pollution, if not all, are also linked with pumping. And we showed that if we are looking at conservation of deep groundwater, which we are calling nowadays as the resource for future, can get polluted because of this arsenic pollution laden shallow water to be transmitted at deeper depth, because of pumping at the present rate, being enhanced by 10 to 20 times. So a particle of the pollutant which would take 250 years to travel to a depth of 150 meters below ground level can just come in 5 years now, okay, and possibly has. So many of the areas at least in West Bengal that we have studied in details, many of the deeper groundwater is found to be polluted. And one of the reasons that we have been able to attribute it is the pumping. Same way, using the Jal Jeevan Mission database, using 2.3 million locations, we are also able to map the fluoride, high fluoride areas across the country. Now, we are still in the process of developing the artificial intelligence model and so on, so I would not preempt it. But what we have seen that at least 30 million people are at risk as of the initial data shows. And then nitrate. Nitrate, as you know, it's more of a human pollutant. It is not that much that it comes from the nature, but it's mostly from the human and its associated things that we human do in terms of farming, cultivation, urban sewage, that would contribute to the nitrate pollution in groundwater. And what the map shows here, again integrating about 25 lakh data points, is that over the years the nitrate pollution has actually come down. Okay, that's a good thing. There can be various reasons for it. One of the primary one would be the decrease in use of artificial fertilizers. But what we have seen even today, much part of the central India actually is polluted by nitrate pollution. And of course, pesticides. Now, this is something which in India we don't try to talk too much. Even if we talk like we talk in a very local scale, there are plenty of studies which are in a village or a town or something like that, but we don't try to understand the larger picture. Now, pesticide is something that it's kind of across our life in today's time, and it is not only the developing world but also in India that we have been using pesticides in a lot of way. Not just drinking water, but water in various other ways. And it is not just the pesticide in your bottle of water, but also in the other drinks that you might take just for refreshment and other things. So as you know, for all the hue and cry and the subsequent movie, because of the finding of pesticide in some of the colored drinks, but that all eventually drains down to groundwater. So, with the study with my students, I've studied the existence of pesticides and other persistent organic pollutants, which we call the POPs, in major parts of Western Bengal Basin, which is a sub-basin of the Ganges River in West Bengal, and we found out that millions in Bengal are not only exposed to arsenic but are also exposed to pesticides, both in the Ganga River and the groundwater. Okay, so as this slide would show, that these POPs, which is the persistent organic pollutants, they exist in several places in the Western Bengal Basin, and these pesticides would include pesticides like alachlor, methyl malathion, and so on, deadly poisons actually, poisons which typically are used to kill insects. So obviously those pesticides, if taken in a larger proportion, can also kill human. So this is a map showing the distribution of the pesticides, malathion, alachlor, atrazine, diazine, and linden in the Western Bengal Basin. Of course, the red lines are the ones, sorry, the red points are the ones where we have much excess concentration of the pesticides. Yellow are just at the permissible limit, and green are safe. Same way, we have PHs, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And what you can see are the maps showing the distribution of naphthalene, phenanthrene, fluoroptene, and anthracene. Again, you can see there are a lot of red dots showing that groundwater in parts of this Ganges Basin in West Bengal do have a lot of PHs in their level. And we were able to redistribute it to the land use, and we were able to find out that much of these are actually attributable to the type of land use that we have. And we have the urban setting, we have the peri-urban setting, as well as rural setting, agricultural setting, which can be used to distribute the type of pollutants that we see in the groundwater. And then the last one is sanitation. Now this is something that not too much work talked in the groundwater circle. People in the public health would talk a lot about it, not in the groundwater scientists much, but in my shoe, in also working in the School of Environmental Science and Engineering, I've been also working with the sanitation influenced water pollution in this country. And this actually came much to a highlight in 2014 when the present government introduced the Swachh Bharat mission, and there was a lot of I would say euphoria about the Swachh Bharat mission and the pollution, the good things that it can do. Now, one of the things that it can possibly also result to is managing the groundwater pollution, either good way or bad way. And we have been trying to study that, over the years. So what we have done, again, tapping into the Jal Jeevan Mission database, we looked at the 710 blocks, 7,010 blocks across India, and we mapped the acute diarrheal cases that are caused by groundwater pollution related to sanitation. And we were able to identify the people who are actually dying because of the fecal coliform pollution of groundwater. The interesting thing is, we found that maybe the Swachh Bharat mission is actually helping. And over the years, the sanitation-induced pollution of the groundwater is actually getting better. Now, the other interesting aspect of it, that we were also able to map this groundwater pollution due to sanitation to economic development, and that's where the social scientists would come in. So we worked with NASA, and we worked with their Nightlight database to use it as a proxy of economics, microeconomics, and we tagged it to the sanitation and the sanitation-induced groundwater pollution, and we were able to show a direct linkage. we were able to show that economic growth actually is reducing fecal pollution in northern India, and of course across India. So we were able to see that as India is growing as an economic superpower, actually the groundwater pollution due to sanitation is getting better. However, there is still a lot of road that we have to make, and that is actually more related to the human factors, and those relate to perception, accessibility, impractical design, and of course, social unacceptability. So with that, I will end just highlighting, just taking this opportunity to advertise this book that just got published 3 days back, where two of the eminent speakers of this forum, Dr. Dipankar Saha and Professor Tushar Shah, has also contributed. It's one of the largest agglomeration of groundwater studies across the world that we have published just 3 days back. It's a 700 pages book, and you are welcome to take a look at it. I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Professor Mukherjee, for the very enlightening talk. And now we can use use some time for answering the questions. So I think there are a few questions. Let us see from the beginning. I think the initial question is for Dr. Marwaha about the comment on groundwater observation wells and how do you decide to place them. So if you can answer briefly.
Thank you, Dr. Pandya.
There are probably second question is also for you.
I have noted down, sir. I'll
please.
like to react to both of them.
Yeah.
So there were some questions when Dr. Pati was actually making his inaugural speech. There were certain issues that how do you, from Mr. Biplab Chatterjee, that how do you, the aquifer storages are there, then there is large how activities are to be undertaken. Then there was a question from Mr. Saif Ali, how the observation wells, which you just pointed out. First, I'll react to Mr. Saif Ali that the observation wells the CGWB is actually doing the monitoring of the groundwater levels. You mean observation wells with respect to that? Probably I'd like to answer to that. We are trying to make that each quadrant of the country is being covered by a representative well as best as possible. Depending upon the homogeneity of the aquifers and heterogeneity, this figure is decided. In case, say, certain parts of Uttar Pradesh or northern part of Punjab or say certain northern parts of Haryana, they have the quite homogeneous aquifer disposition. The number can be reduced. But in case of the huge stress of the aquifers, the number has to be increased so that the better information on the aquifer stresses is available for undertaking groundwater modeling or any studies thereof. There was right. I'd like to say something about some micro level work which was done by yesterday. We had a talk in which our Honorable Secretary Sahab has chaired, and Lakshman Singh Lapodia ji from the Lapodia village, he has told about his efforts. In Rajasthan, the water levels are declining slowly. The top aquifers are also getting desaturated. But in a time frame of a very lower, a few years only, an area having just 500 to 600 mm, they were able to restore the groundwater levels by storing all the water which falls over that area. So it was very interesting talk yesterday. So I just wanted to say that with the small efforts, we can actually get good results whatsoever there are. There is one more question which is coming. I'll just see whether it is to be me or there is a question from Professor Shakil Ahmed. He knows good about the aquifers also. His question is there any specific study or analysis made during NECQM program, the spatial variability of aquifers, geological information, data density used in NECQM? Sir, you can, there are so many studies actually which have been done. Because in the alluvial areas, as you know, that in case we have the lesser number of the wells, but we can still have the better accuracy. But in the southern part of the country, within the crystallines or in even the basaltic aquifers, the more the information, the better the results will be. So that we can have the better controls and we can analyze in a better way. So with all these, I think I have answered all those questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I think now there are no more questions I am seeing in my box. So we can as well now conclude the session. I am thankful to both my co-speakers, Mr. Sanjay Marwaha and Dr. Abhijit Mukherjee. Mr. Sanjay Marwaha gave a very good account of the National Aquifer Management Program, and it's indeed a very important work. His insights of the various areas of groundwater, its potential, its recharge, and its potential for exploitation was very useful. And I think these areas need to be publicized and published much further, so that our policies go in line with what is available to us. Similarly, we had Dr. Abhijit Mukherjee, who spoke about the groundwater quality, which is a very important aspect and not recognized adequately, especially because of the intensive agriculture and intensive urbanization that we are practicing, which is providing a lot of poor quality water. And that poor quality water is going as some sort of a recharge into the groundwater and polluting the groundwater, because groundwater, once polluted, will probably take centuries to really get back to its normal area. So both these areas are quite useful, and I'm thankful to both of them for having made very excellent presentations. And now I will hand over to Dr. Dipankar Saha for further taking the session.
Okay. Thank you, sir. But you have summed up the session, but you have not mentioned about your nice talk. I must say thanks to you for your immensely enriching talk, and you have nicely pointed out certain things that there should be a synergy between macro and micro. It's not that if the argument is, if all water is captured in the field, then from where the dams will get their water, the storage will get their water. That we must think of in a synergetic way. And you have rightly pointed out the interbasin transfer, interlinking of rivers, and the most important thing is how to store the skewed rainfall. The recharge is obviously is a slow process. Obviously, in artificial recharge scenario, we can recharge faster, but in the climate change scenario, when the rainfall is skewed, we have to answer how to store it over surface or below surface. So there should be a synergetic effort for that. Thank you, sir, Chairman, sir, and two distinguished panelists, my previous colleague Marwa Sahab and Abhijit Mukherjee Sahab, for their thoughtful presentation, very informative presentation. And we are delayed, so I am proposing that by 1:30 we will start our next session. And please, all the attendees, please come back at 1:30. And very exciting technical sessions are there, chaired by very distinguished person, and the talks are very distinguished and very learned persons, and there will be a lot of interactions also. Thank you, and we are meeting again at 1:30 after a brief gap. Thank you, sir.
Thank you all. I would request delegates, you can make use of the social launch during the lunch break. You'll be able to network with others. You can pick any of the table and the chair, and you can interact with your fellow delegates over the voice, video. You can do screen share, you can have text share. And we'll join back start at 1:30.
Okay, please announce to assemble 1:30 again.
Yes, sir. Once we start the session, automatically everyone will be back by 1:30.